The air outside Jerusalem tasted of dust and distant smoke. It was the 14th day of July, in the year of our Lord 1099, and the sun had long since disappeared behind the western hills. The heat that had pressed down all day still lingered in the stones, in the armor stacked beside makeshift tents, in the dry earth that had not seen rain in weeks. You could hear the camp settling, leather creaking, metal softly touching metal, the low murmur of men who spoke only when necessary, as if the night itself demanded silence. Jerusalem's walls stood less than a quarter-mile away, dark, massive, older than memory. They seemed to absorb what little moonlight touched them, offering nothing back. 3 years had passed since leaving home. 3 years of roads that never ended, of languages you could not speak, of cities whose names you still mispronounced. And now, after everything, the walls were there, close enough to touch by morning. You remembered the day you left. November rain, gray sky, your mother's face at the doorway, backlit by hearth fire. She had not cried, not where you could see. She had simply stood there, one hand on the doorframe, as if holding the house upright through will alone. Your father had walked with you to the edge of the village. He spoke of duty, of honor, of returning. The words came easily to him. They always had. He was a man who believed the world made sense, who trusted that right action led to right outcome. You had believed it too then. The road from Normandy to Constantinople had taken 4 months, then another year to reach Antioch, then the siege, then the march south through heat that made armor unbearable and terrain that offered no shade. 93 men had left your village, 41 remained. The others were buried in places whose names you could pronounce but not spell, or they were not buried at all. Fever took some, thirst took others, battle took the rest. You did not think about them often anymore. There was no time for that. But in moments like this, when the day's tasks were finished and tomorrow had not yet begun, their absence was a weight you carried without acknowledging. Jerusalem's walls looked the same in darkness as they had at noon, impenetrable, ancient, indifferent to the men who had crossed continents to stand before them. But tonight, they were only shadows. The camp had been here for weeks, long enough for routines to form, long enough for certain stones to become familiar landmarks, long enough to know which parts of the wall caught the first light and which remained in shadow until noon, long enough to bury men who died of thirst within sight of walls that protected wells they could not reach. Tomorrow had been discussed in whispers for days. Everyone knew. No one said it directly. The siege towers were ready. 2 of them. Massive structures of wood that had been scavenged from miles around, timber torn from abandoned villages, beams pulled from ruined churches, planks stripped from anything that would burn if left standing. You had helped build the southern tower. Days of labor under sun that turned metal too hot to touch. Your hands still bore splinters that had worked themselves too deep to remove. They would heal, or they wouldn't. There were larger concerns now. Commanders had walked between the tents at sunset, their faces unreadable. Orders had been given quietly, without ceremony. Check your equipment. Sharpen what needs sharpening. Sleep if you can. Sleep. As if any man could sleep tonight. You sat now on a flat stone worn smooth by others before you. Your surcoat lay folded beside you, the white fabric dingy now, the red cross faded to rust brown in places. It had been pristine once. You remembered putting it on for the first time, the stiffness of new cloth, the sharpness of the dye. That felt like someone else's memory. Your sword rested across your knees, the blade catching faint starlight. You had cleaned it this afternoon. Again. There was nothing left to clean, but your hands needed occupation. The pommel was wrapped in leather so worn it had molded to the shape of your grip. You knew every irregularity, every ridge. In complete darkness, you could have drawn this sword and known it was yours by touch alone. Somewhere in the distance, a horse shifted its weight. Canvas flapped once in a breath of wind that came and went. The smell of cook fires had faded hours ago, replaced by night air and dry earth, and the particular scent of too many men living too close together for too long. Jerusalem did not sleep. You could sense movement beyond the walls, torches moving along the ramparts, voices calling in a language that sounded like water over stones. Arabic you had learned, though you could not speak a word of it. They were waiting too. 40,000 people lived in that city, someone had said. You could not imagine that many people in one place. Your village had been 70 souls, maybe 80 in good years. 40,000. They knew you were coming. They had known for days, watching the siege towers rise, watching the ladders being assembled, watching the men gather. Did they sleep? Did they sit on the other side of those walls, checking weapons, thinking of home, wondering if they would see another sunset? Probably. The thought was uncomfortable. It was easier when enemies remained abstract. Numbers, obstacles, problems to be solved, but you had seen faces on those walls. You had heard children crying behind them. You had smelled bread baking in the early mornings, the same smell as bread baking anywhere. A crusade was supposed to be simple, clear. The words in Normandy had made it sound ordained, inevitable. Just nothing here was simple. You shifted on the stone, feeling the ache in your lower back that had become constant somewhere between Antioch and here. The weight of mail did that. 3 years of carrying metal on your shoulders. The moon was rising now, nearly full, bright enough to read by if you had anything to read, bright enough to cast shadows, bright enough to make the walls of Jerusalem look almost silver. Tomorrow, those walls would fill your vision. You would stand at their base and look up at stones stacked higher than cathedral walls. You would climb, or you would die trying, or you would watch others climb and die. But tonight, there was only waiting, and the stars, and the particular quality of silence that comes before violence. Robert sat 3 tents away, sharpening his dagger for the 3rd time today. You could hear the blade against the whetstone, a rhythmic scraping that had become so familiar it was almost soothing. Robert had been sharpening something every night for a month. He claimed it helped him think. You suspected it just helped him avoid thinking. He was from Rouen, a fisherman's son who had never held a sword before the recruitment sermons began. Now he could disassemble and reassemble his equipment in complete darkness. War made craftsmen of everyone who survived it. Beyond Robert's tent, you could hear Guilhem praying. His voice was low but steady, working through the same prayers he said every night. Pater Noster, Ave Maria. The words blending together into rhythm rather than meaning. Guilhem had been a monk before this, not a warrior monk, just a simple brother from a monastery outside Toulouse. He had joined because his abbot had said it was God's will. He had stayed because there was no way home. He still prayed like a monk, with discipline, with structure. Whether he still believed the prayers were heard, you did not know. He never spoke of it. Tancred's fire had gone out an hour ago. You could see the dark shape of him sitting motionless, staring at the walls. He had not moved in the entire time you had been watching. Tancred had lost his brother at Dorylaeum. No body to bury, just gone. One moment fighting beside him, the next moment the line had shifted, and when it settled again, his brother was not there. He had looked for 3 days, searching among the dead, asking everyone, offering money for information. Nothing. Some men went home after losses like that. Tancred went quiet. He still fought, still followed orders, but something behind his eyes had gone distant. These were the men you would stand beside tomorrow. Not the heroes from the sermons, not the blessed warriors promised glory and salvation, just Robert, who had been a fisherman, Guilhem, who missed his monastery, Tancred, who still looked for his brother in crowds. Ordinary men who had walked extraordinary distances for reasons they could no longer clearly articulate. You knew dozens more. Pierre, who sang Norman songs off-key. Mathieu, who could start a fire in any weather. Girard, who collected stones from every place they stopped. Tomorrow, some of them would die. The thought was neither dramatic nor frightening, just factual. Men died in assaults. It was the nature of the thing. You had seen it enough times to know the mathematics of it. What you did not know was which ones, or if you would be among them. The randomness of it was the worst part. Not courage or cowardice or skill, just chance. A stone thrown from above happens to find you instead of the man beside you. An arrow catches wind and drifts 3 feet left. A ladder breaks under weight it had supported a moment before. No narrative, no meaning, just chaos with permanent consequences. Robert's whetstone stopped. You heard him test the edge of the dagger against his thumb, heard the satisfied grunt, heard him slide it back into its sheath. Tomorrow, then, he said to no one in particular. No one answered. None of them were sleeping either. There was parchment in your pack. You had carried it from Antioch. Before that, from Constantinople. It had survived rain, river crossings, the inside of a tent that collapsed during a sandstorm outside Tripoli. You had thought about writing home more times than you could count. The candle beside you burned with a small, steady flame. Wax pooled slowly at its base, forming a small white disk that would harden by morning. You smoothed the parchment flat against your knee, felt its texture under your fingertips. Still good, still whole. The ink was another matter. You had purchased it in Constantinople from a merchant who swore it was the finest available. It had dried to paste somewhere in Anatolia. You had tried to reconstitute it with water. The result was gray and thin, but it would write, probably. You dipped the quill, a raven's feather you had found outside Ramla, and watched a drop of diluted ink hang from its tip. What would you say? That Jerusalem was real? That the journey had not been a dream or a madness? That tomorrow you would stand at the base of walls you had only imagined in prayers? That would be the simple version. The version your father would want to hear. Evidence of progress. Proof of purpose, but there was more. You could write about the heat, about how it changed the way you thought, slowed everything down, made simple tasks feel monumental, about thirst that made your tongue stick to the roof of your mouth, about watching men die from sun and dehydration within sight of the city they had crossed the world to reach. You could write about Antioch, about the 8 months camped outside its walls, about winter rain that turned the ground to swamp, about rats in the supply tents, about the smell of a siege camp after months of occupation. You could write about the victories, Dorylaeum, Nicaea, the battles that the priests would talk about in churches for generations, how they sounded glorious in description but felt like chaos and terror and random survival. You could write about the men, about Pierre, who had saved your life at Dorylaeum by pushing you aside half a second before a mace would have taken your head. How he never mentioned it afterward. How you never thanked him because to acknowledge it would be to acknowledge how close it had been. About the Greek Christians in Antioch who had welcomed them as liberators, only to be treated as barely better than the Muslims by some of the crusaders. About the looting. About things you had seen that made you look away. You could write about doubt. About lying awake at night wondering if God actually wanted this. If this was actually holy. If killing men who prayed differently but still prayed made you righteous or just made you a killer. About the priest who had blessed them before they left Normandy, promising salvation and glory. About how those words felt hollow now, worn thin by reality. But you could not write any of that. Not because it was untrue, but because there were no words for the distance between what you had believed then and what you knew now. Between the person who had left and the person who sat here, parchment on his knee, unable to begin. The ink had dried on the quill while you thought. You set it down carefully. The parchment remained blank. Some letters existed better unwritten. Some distances could not be crossed with words. Your mother would understand, or she wouldn't. Either way, the blankness might tell her more than anything you could actually write. You folded the parchment back into your pack, next to the other things you had carried across continents. A small wooden cross your sister had carved. A stone from the field behind your house. A piece of cloth your mother had torn from her own sleeve the morning you left. Relics of a life that felt increasingly theoretical. The candle flickered. You watched the flame bend toward a draft you could not feel, then recover. Bend and recover. Tomorrow would write its own letter, in blood probably, on stone, in a language everyone could read. Your hands moved automatically now, checking, adjusting. The same motions you had performed 100 times before, 100 different nights. The mail felt heavier than it had 3 years ago, or perhaps you had simply become more aware of weight. Each ring connected to the next. Thousands of them. Someone had spent months making this. Someone whose name you would never know, in a workshop you would never see. You ran your fingers along the links, searching for gaps, for rust, for weakness. The metal was cool despite the day's heat, radiating the chill of night air. It whispered softly as you moved it. A sound you had learned to sleep through, to wake to find comfort in. The sound of survival. There were repairs you had made yourself. Sections where newer rings stood out slightly brighter against the aged metal. A patch near the right shoulder where Turkish arrows had punched through at Dorylaeum. You had spent an entire evening outside Antioch learning to connect rings from a Norman armorer who spoke no French, but whose hands taught what words could not. The leather straps of your gambeson were worn but still strong. You had replaced them twice. Once in Nicaea, using leather cut from a saddle abandoned on the road. Once after Dorylaeum, bartering 3 days of bread ration for good straps from a merchant who followed the armies. The stitching was uneven but functional. You had done it yourself by firelight, squinting to see, pushing the needle through with pliers because the leather was too thick for fingers alone. This was what you had become. A person who measured life in the durability of straps. Who knew the difference between rust that was surface and rust that was structural. Who could feel the weight of his armor and know, instantly, if something was missing or displaced. Your helmet sat beside you, simple, unmarked. A single dent above the left temple from something you did not remember. You picked it up, turned it slowly in the moonlight. The interior padding was your own work, cloth strips wound and stitched into place. They smelled of sweat and old leather and the particular staleness of metal that had been worn too long. You had tried washing them once. They had taken 3 days to dry and felt worse after, so you had given up on that. Some things were better left as they were. The chin strap needed replacement. You had been meaning to do it for a month. The leather was cracked in 2 places, held together more by habit than by strength. Tomorrow would test it. Tomorrow would test everything. You set the helmet down and reached for your sword belt. The belt itself was good. Thick leather, well made, purchased in Constantinople when you still had money and optimism. The sword it held was better. Your father's sword. He had carried it when he was young, before age and injury turned him into a farmer who had once been a soldier. He had given it to you the day you left, not ceremoniously. He had simply walked into the barn where you were checking your equipment one last time, held it out and said, "Keep the edge true." That was all. No speech about honor, no blessing, just practical advice from a practical man. The blade was good steel, not the finest. Your family had never been wealthy, but honest work from an honest smith. The balance was perfect, slightly blade heavy, which made cuts more effective but required stronger wrists. You had learned to manage that. The pommel was wrapped in leather that had molded to your father's grip before it molded to yours. Sometimes holding it, you could almost feel his hand beneath your own, the ghost of his grip guiding yours. You drew the blade now, slowly, listening to the whisper of steel against wood and leather. The edge caught moonlight and held it. You had sharpened it this afternoon until you could shave hair from your arm. You had honed it again an hour ago. There was nothing left to sharpen, but you checked anyway. Ran your thumb carefully along the flat of the blade, feeling for the subtle ridge that indicated a true edge. Found it. Perfect. The sword had killed men. You did not know how many. Enough that you had stopped counting. Enough that the weight of it felt familiar. Enough that you could close your eyes and know exactly where it needed to be in your hand for any given cut. This was not the weapon of a knight in songs. It did not have a name. It had never been blessed by a saint. It had not been forged in mystical fires or quenched in dragon's blood. It was just good steel, well maintained, in practiced hands. That was all it needed to be. You slid it back into the scabbard. The fit was perfect. Snug enough that it would not rattle, loose enough that you could draw it in a fraction of a second. How many times had you drawn this sword? Practiced in camp, drilled in formation, drew it in anger, drew it in fear. Tomorrow, you would draw it again. The thought was neither frightening nor comforting, just factual. You picked up your shield next. Wood and leather over a wooden frame. Painted white once, with a red cross that had been bright and sharp. Now the white was gray and the cross was faded, and there were gouges in the wood where blades had cut too deep. Each gouge was a story. Most you did not remember. Some you wished you could forget. There was a split along the left edge that you had bound with rope, not perfect, but it held. The grip on the back was wrapped in cloth to prevent blisters. The strap that allowed you to sling it over your back was fraying, but still functional. Tomorrow would test that too. Everything would be tested tomorrow. You set the shield down and simply sat for a moment, looking at the collection of objects that defined your existence now. Mail that whispered, a helmet that smelled of old sweat, a sword that knew your hand, a shield that bore scars. These were not the tools of glory, they were the tools of survival. And tomorrow, they would either be enough or they would not. Your water skin hung from a tent pole, nearly empty. Water had been the constant concern, not walls, not soldiers. Water. The springs outside Jerusalem were controlled by the defenders. Any attempt to reach them during daylight was met with arrows. Night trips were possible but dangerous, and the water you could carry back was never enough. 40,000 crusaders. Perhaps fewer now. It was hard to count. Men died. Men deserted. The numbers shifted like sand. But even at reduced numbers, the water requirements were impossible. You had learned to ration. A mouthful in the morning, a mouthful at midday, a mouthful at night. Never enough to quench thirst, just enough to keep functioning. Some men had gone mad from it. You had watched Guillaume, not the monk, a different Guillaume, start babbling about rivers on the 4th day of reduced rations. By the 6th day, he was insisting he could hear water underground. By the 8th day, he had walked into the desert looking for it. They found his body a week later, or what the sun had left of it. Water-shaped strategy now. The assault tomorrow was driven as much by thirst as by faith. The camp could not sustain itself much longer. An Egyptian relief force was supposedly marching north. Between dehydration and reinforcements, time was collapsing. Tomorrow was not chosen for its auspiciousness. It was chosen because it was the last viable day. You lifted the water skin, felt its lightness, felt the small amount of liquid inside shift and settle. You had been saving this. One full mouthful for tonight, one for morning. You unstoppered it and drank half. Slowly. Letting the water sit in your mouth before swallowing. Maximizing the sensation of it. Warm. Tasting of leather and distance. Perfect. You stoppered it again and hung it back on the pole. The other half was for dawn. Nearby, you could hear Guillaume still praying. His voice had taken on the mechanical quality it got during long prayer sessions. Words worn smooth by repetition. Did God listen to prayers like that? Prayers that had become rhythm instead of meaning? Did God listen to any prayers here? The priests said yes. They said this entire enterprise was God's will, that Jerusalem called out for liberation, that Christian blood spilled in its reclamation was blessed. You wanted to believe them. Some days you did. Other days, nights like this, you wondered if God was watching at all. If the prayers rose into an empty sky and dissipated like morning mist. If men killed each other over this city for reasons that had nothing to do with divinity, and everything to do with power and pride, and the simple human need to make suffering mean something. You did not voice these thoughts. To voice them was to risk being named a heretic, to risk being turned away from the very army that had become the only community you knew. So you kept them inside, where they echoed, where they grew, where they made you wonder, on nights like this, what you were actually doing here. In the distance, someone started singing. A hymn you recognized from childhood. The words came back unbidden. Veni Creator Spiritus Mentes Tuorum Visita Cum. Holy Spirit, visit the minds of your people. Other voices joined. The song spreading through the camp like slow fire. Men who could not agree on strategy or leadership could still sing together. You did not join, you just listened. The harmony was imperfect, voices untrained, pitch uncertain. But there was something in it, some quality of shared humanity that transcended the words. These men would kill tomorrow, would die tomorrow, would do terrible things and suffer terrible things. But tonight they sang. And for a moment, just a moment, the crusade felt almost holy again. The feeling did not last. It never did. But it had been there. However briefly, you closed your eyes and let the singing wash over you. Veni Creator Spiritus. Come, Holy Spirit. Tomorrow, they would need all the help they could get. Midnight passed without ceremony. The singing had faded an hour ago. Now the camp settled into the particular silence of men who were not sleeping but trying to rest anyway. You did not sleep. Most did not. Men sat in small groups, speaking in low voices or not at all. Some prayed. Some sharpened blades that were already sharp. Some simply stared at the walls as if memorizing them would make tomorrow easier. Robert had moved closer. He sat just outside the reach of your firelight, which had burned down to embers. You could see his silhouette against the slightly lighter darkness of the sky. "You ever think about just walking away?" he said quietly. The question hung in the air between you. Every day, you admitted, it was true. The thought came most mornings, before the heat fully set in, before the day's routine took over, in that moment between sleep and waking when anything still seemed possible. You could just leave, walk south, or north, or east, away from Jerusalem, away from walls and siege towers and tomorrow. No one would stop you. There were no chains, no physical barriers, just the weight of 3 years and the impossibility of the road home and the question of what you would say if you made it. I walked away. I came all this distance and then I walked away. "But you won't," Robert said. Not a question. "No. Me neither." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I don't even remember why I came anymore. I remember the priest talking. I remember it sounding important, but the actual reason, it's gone." You understood. The speeches in Normandy felt like they had happened to someone else. The promises of salvation and glory and the liberation of the Holy Land. They had not mentioned the thirst, or the heat, or the months of waiting, or the way war made you tired in your bones. "We're here because we're here, you said. That's all that's left." Robert laughed. A soft, bitter sound. 3 years for, "We're here because we're here." My father would be so proud. Mine too. The moon had moved across the sky. It was lower now, hanging above the western hills. In a few hours it would set, and then the last darkness before dawn, and then everything else. You thought about time, how slow it moved when you watched it, how the space between now and sunrise seemed impossibly vast, a gulf that could never be crossed. And yet 3 years had passed in what felt like moments when you looked back. Entire seasons compressed into impressions, summer heat, winter rain, the eternal dust of roads. Time was strange in war. It stretched and contracted without pattern. Hours could feel like days. Months could disappear entirely. Tomorrow would probably last forever. Or it would be over before you realized it had started. There was no way to know. Your water skin hung from the tent pole, half full, one mouthful. You looked at it, felt the pull of thirst, resisted. That mouthful was for dawn. You had promised yourself. Discipline was all you had left. Around the camp, you could sense similar vigils happening. Thousands of men, each alone with their thoughts, each pretending they were not afraid. Fear was not shameful. You had learned that. Everyone was afraid before battle. The difference was in who admitted it and who pretended otherwise. The ones who pretended were more likely to do something stupid, to compensate for fear with bravado, to take unnecessary risks trying to prove something to themselves. The ones who admitted it, at least to themselves, tended to survive longer. You were afraid of pain, of failure, of dying in a way that was meaningless or slow or far from anything familiar, but also of living, of carrying more memories like the ones you already had, of adding to the weight. "Robert," you said into the darkness. "Yeah?" "Tomorrow, stay close." "You too." It was a small thing, words that meant nothing tactically. You could not protect each other. Battle did not work that way, but saying it helped. Having it said helped. You were not alone, none of you were. You were all here together waiting for dawn, pretending to be braver than you felt. That had to count for something. The eastern sky began to change. Not light yet, just the absence of absolute darkness. A subtle shift from black to something softer, deep blue, the color of old bruises, the color of the sky before the world wakes. You had not slept, had not expected to. Your body ached from sitting too long in one position. Your back, your legs. The persistent pain in your left shoulder where a Turkish mace had connected at Dorylaeum. It had not broken anything, but it had never quite healed properly either. You stood, slowly, feeling every year of the campaign in your joints. Around you, others were standing too.
Do you hear that?
No orders given,
Yes.
just movement.
We have to go.
The camp waking to what it had been waiting for. The air was cold. Desert nights were always cold. You had forgotten that in the heat of yesterday.
3 years for
Now
this.
your breath made small clouds. You reached for your gambeson.
What this means.
The padded cloth was stiff, crusty with dried sweat and dust. You pulled it on, feeling it settle onto your shoulders, the familiar weight of it. Then the mail. This required help. Robert. He appeared at your side. Neither of you spoke. You had done this enough times that words were unnecessary. You lifted your arms. He lifted the mail shirt, carefully, because it was heavy and awkward, and dropping it would damage the rings. Up, over your head, down onto your shoulders. The weight settled, familiar. 40 pounds of iron rings, maybe 50. You had never weighed it exactly.
God have mercy on us.
You rolled your shoulders, adjusting the distribution of weight, checked that the mail hung correctly, that it covered what needed covering, that it did not bind anywhere. Robert tied the belt that helped support the weight, pulled it snug, checked the knot. "Good?"
Path is clearer
he
now.
asked.
Yes,
"Good."
we can breathe
You
easier
returned the
again.
favor, helping him into his own mail. His was older than yours, more repairs, more patches, but well-maintained. Robert took care of his equipment with the same careful attention he had probably given his fishing nets. The routine was calming, purposeful movement, familiar steps, one piece at a time. Gambeson, mail, belt, sword, dagger, shield. You picked up your helmet but did not put it on yet. The day was not hot yet. You would wear it when necessary, and not before. Around you, hundreds, thousands of others were doing the same. The sound of metal and leather multiplying, a quiet symphony of preparation. Men checked each other's equipment, tightened each other's straps, made small adjustments that might matter or might not. No one spoke of fear. No one needed to. The walls of Jerusalem were visible now, clearer, closer, the stone taking on texture as light slowly returned. You could see the height of them, the thickness, the marks of age and repair, the battlements where defenders would stand, where they were probably standing now, watching this same dawn, making their own preparations. Somewhere, a priest began speaking blessings over a small group. His voice was calm, routine, as if this were any morning, as if the sun rose for the simple purpose of blessing another ordinary day. In nomine Patris et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti, in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. You did not join the blessing. You had been blessed before Nicaea, before Dorylaeum, before Antioch, before every battle. The blessings had not stopped men from dying.
Keep moving, Robert.
You checked your sword one last time, drew it 6 inches, checked that the draw was smooth, that there was no binding, slid it back. Perfect. The water skin. You took it from the tent pole,
I don't
felt
know
its
this place.
lightness, the last mouthful inside. You unstoppered it, drank,
I'm lost.
slowly, completely. The water was gone, the skin was empty. There would be more water inside Jerusalem. or there would not. Either way, what you had was now gone. You dropped the empty skin on the ground and did not look back. The waiting was over.
I told you I didn't.
Formation began without drama. Men simply started moving,
Just keep walking.
grouping by banner, by captain, by the informal bonds that formed through shared survival. You found your place in the line. Robert to your left, Tancred to your right,
Empty.
Guillaume somewhere behind.
Safe.
The same men you had stood with at Antioch. The same men who had become something between comrades and family. The siege towers were already moving. You could hear them before you could see them clearly. The grinding of wheels against earth. The groaning of wood under impossible weight. The shouting of men coordinating movement. 2 towers. Massive structures that had taken weeks to build. They rolled forward on wheels wrapped in wet hide to protect against fire. Each tower was covered in animal skins that had been soaked overnight. Your group would not use the towers. Those were for the first wave. The shock troops. The men who would take the initial arrow storm while the towers approached the walls. Your group had ladders. 12-foot wooden ladders that would lean against 40-foot walls. Simple, insufficient, deadly, but someone had to climb them. Orders were passed down the line, not shouted, spoken from man to man like a rumor spreading. Southern wall, wait for the tower to engage, then advance with ladders, hold until the tower creates an opening. Simple, in theory. In practice, it would be chaos. It was always chaos. But you did not say this. You just nodded and passed the order to Robert. The sky was lighter now, pink touching the horizon, dawn coming whether anyone was ready or not. You could see faces on the walls, defenders watching, waiting. They knew you were coming, they had known for weeks. 40,000 people in that city defending their homes, their families, their lives. You tried not to think about that. This was not the time for nuance, for doubt, for the questions that kept you awake at night. This was the time for following the man in front of you, for keeping your line, for climbing when it was time to climb. The thinking could come later, if there was a later. Someone started a prayer. Others joined. The words blended together, became rhythm more than language. Pater noster qui es in caelis, sanctificetur nomen tuum. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. You moved your lips, but did not speak. The prayer was for those who needed it. You had said enough prayers. The towers were closer to the walls now. 100 yards, 75. Arrows began. Not a storm. Not yet. Just testing. Defenders finding range. Arrows that arced high and fell among the advancing men. Most missed. Some didn't. You heard a cry behind you, heard someone fall, heard others close the gap. The line kept moving. 50 yards. The arrows increased, more archers finding positions. More defenders realizing this was not a feint. An arrow hit the ground 3 feet to your left. Another passed overhead with a sound like ripping cloth. Shields, someone called. You raised yours, angled it above you, felt the weight of it on your arm. 30 yards. The sound was building now. Voices rising, not shouting, not yet. Just the accumulation of breath, of movement, of hundreds of men converging on stone that had stood for centuries. The towers reached the wall. The sound of wood meeting stone echoed across the field. Grinding, settling, adjusting. And then the real arrows came. The first movement forward was not a charge. You had learned that at Dorylaeum. Charges broke formations. Charges separated men from each other. Charges turned organized groups into scattered individuals. This was steady, deliberate. The advance of men who had walked 1,000 miles and would walk these last few hundred paces with the same grinding determination. The ground between your position and the wall was uneven. Rocks, scattered debris from earlier attempts. The bodies of men who had tried this before and failed. You watched your footing, stepping over obstacles, maintaining formation. The shield felt heavier with each step. Your arm burned from holding it raised, but you kept it up. Arrows fell like rain now, not metaphorical rain, actual rain. Hundreds of arrows loosed from the walls, the sky dark with them, the sound of them cutting air like wind through trees. Most hit shields, some hit ground. Some hit men. You heard impacts, heard cries,
The day
heard the
continues.
sound of metal on metal as arrows hit armor and deflected or didn't. The man in front of you stumbled,
Body protests.
kept moving. 20 yards. You could see the wall clearly now. Every stone, every imperfection,
Keep
the
moving.
faces of defenders
We're almost
above,
there.
their expressions unreadable at this distance.
I'm exhausted.
The siege tower had engaged. You could hear fighting at the top of it, could hear the sounds of men in combat, metal on metal, screaming, wood breaking. Ladders! Someone shouted. Your group broke left. Toward the section of wall that was your assignment. 10 men carrying 2 ladders, 15 yards. The weight of the ladder was distributed among 5 men. You were third in line. The wood was heavy, unwieldy. It wanted to twist and fall. Steady, called the man at the front. 10 yards. An arrow hit the ladder, punched through the wood, kept going. The man behind you made a sound. You did not turn to look. 5 yards. The wall was everything now. Stones stacked impossibly high, the faces above leaning over, hands throwing things, rocks, timber, pots of something that shattered and burned. Raise!
You made it.
The ladder went up. Heavy, awkward, 5 men trying to coordinate movement while under fire. It scraped against the wall as it rose, the sound of wood on stone, the weight of it threatening to pull you over backward.
I have traveled 3
Brace.
years to reach here.
The ladder settled against the
But what does
wall.
it mean?
The angle was
What is
wrong,
my purpose?
too steep. But there was no time to adjust. Climb! The first man went up, then the second. You were third. Your hands found the first rung, wood worn smooth by earlier climbers, wet with something. You did not look to see what. Up. The shield on your back pulled you backward. The sword at your side caught on the rungs. The mail was impossibly heavy. But you climbed, 1 rung at a time. The world narrowed to the space directly in front of your face. Wood. Stone. The back of the man above you. Something hit the wall to your left. Stone chips scattered. One hit your cheek. You felt blood, hot and immediate. You kept climbing. Your arms burned. Your legs burned. Your lungs burned.
See you, brother.
The heat that had not yet risen from the earth was already inside your armor, building, suffocating. Up.
We did what we
The
had
man
to do.
above you reached the top of the ladder. Paused,
And now we must look
struggled to
the
pull
future
himself over.
together.
An arm reached down from above, not to help, to push. The man fell. His body hit the ladder, hit you. You clung to the rungs as the ladder swayed. He fell past you, hit the ground with a sound that was nothing like the sounds they described in songs. You kept climbing, 2 rungs from the top. You could see over the wall now, a section of walkway, defenders in cloth and leather, faces twisted in fear and determination that mirrored your own. 1 rung. Your hand reached the top of the ladder, then the wall itself. Rough stone under your palm. Still cool from the night. You pulled, hauled yourself up, got a knee over. A defender came at you. Spear. Thrusting. You got your shield around. Barely. The spear hit it. Punched through the wood but did not reach flesh. You were half on the wall. Half off. Balanced on your stomach across stone. The defender pulled the spear back, preparing for another thrust. You could not reach your sword. Your position was wrong. Your weight was wrong. So you threw yourself forward. No technique, no skill, just weight and momentum. You hit the defender chest to chest. Both of you went down on the walkway. The impact drove air from your lungs. Stars bloomed in your vision. But you were over the wall. You were inside Jerusalem. What followed was not battle. Battle implied structure, organization, lines and formations and tactical decisions. This was simply bodies in motion, each person trying to survive the next 3 seconds, and then the next, and then the next. You rolled, got to your feet, drew your sword without thinking, the movement automatic, practiced 1,000 times. The defender was getting up too, younger than you. His spear was gone. He drew a curved knife. You did not want to kill him. The thought came unbidden. Clear. Absolute. You did not want to kill this boy who was defending his home from invaders who had crossed the world to take it. But he came at you anyway, and you were tired of dying. Your sword moved. His knife moved. Metal met metal. The clash sent vibrations up your arm. He was fast, faster than you, younger, less burdened by 3 years of campaign. But you had been fighting for 3 years. You did not remember the specifics. Your body moved, training and repetition taking over. The part of your mind that made decisions went quiet. Cut, parry, step, shield, cut. The knife clattered on stone. The boy looked at you, eyes wide, breathing hard. You looked at him, a moment that stretched, and then he ran. You let him go. Around you, others were not so fortunate, or not so merciful. The sounds of combat filled the air, metal, screaming, prayers in languages you did not speak. More crusaders were coming over the wall. The ladder had held. Men poured over. Faster now, overwhelming the immediate defense. The defenders were pulling back, falling back to secondary positions, regrouping. This section of wall was taken. You stood there, sword in hand, blood on the blade that might not be yours, breathing air that tasted of smoke and dust and copper. Jerusalem. You were inside Jerusalem. The city spread below the wall. Streets and buildings and lives. 40,000 lives. And somewhere, commanders were making decisions about what happened next. But you were just a man on a wall, trying to remember why you had come, trying to forget what you would carry away. Time became unclear. Minutes could have been hours. Hours could have been minutes. The sun was higher. You knew that much. But the position told you nothing meaningful. You sat on the wall now, legs dangling over the inside of the city. Your helmet was beside you. You had taken it off at some point. You did not remember when. Your sword was still in your hand. You had not sheathed it. Blood had dried on the blade, dark, crusted. Below, the city continued. Not the same. Changed. Changing. Men moving through streets. Purpose unclear from this height. Smoke rose from several places, thin columns reaching toward a sky that was impossibly, cruelly blue. Perfect weather. The kind of day that should have been for harvests or festivals or children playing in fields. Instead, you could hear shouting. Distant. The sounds bouncing off stone in ways that made direction meaningless, sometimes closer, sometimes farther, always there. You were thirsty. Your water skin was empty, had been empty since before dawn. Your tongue stuck to the roof of your mouth. Your lips were cracked. There was water in Jerusalem. Wells, cisterns. You could find it if you moved. But you did not move. Robert climbed over the wall, sat down beside you. He was bleeding from a cut above his eye. The blood had run down the side of his face and dried in a dark line. "You hurt?" he asked. "I don't know." You checked. Arms, legs, torso. Everything seemed to be working. There was blood on your surcoat, but you did not think it was yours. "You?" you asked. He touched the cut above his eye. Winced. "This. Nothing else." You sat together in silence. Someone else came over the wall, then another, then more. Men who had climbed, who had fought, who had survived. Some sat like you. Some kept moving, down into the city, following orders or instinct or the simple need to keep moving because stopping meant feeling everything. Tancred appeared. He nodded to you. You nodded back. He did not sit. He just stood at the edge of the wall, looking down at the city, his expression unreadable. "Guillem?" you asked. "He's fine. He's praying somewhere, with the priests." Of course he was. The fighting had not stopped. You could still hear it, deeper in the city now. The sounds more scattered, less organized. This was not victory yet. This was just the wall. The rest would take longer. Hours. Days. You did not want to think about it. A priest climbed up. Father Benedict. You knew him from the camps. He had marched with your group since Antioch. "Brothers," he said. His voice was hoarse but steady. The city is falling. God has delivered Jerusalem into our hands. No one responded. He looked at you, at Robert, at the others sitting on the wall. You should give thanks, he said, gently, not commanding, suggesting. Later, Robert said. Father Benedict nodded. He understood, or he pretended to. He blessed you anyway, made the sign of the cross, moved on to others. The sun continued its arc. You watched shadows shift and change, the city below rearranging itself under light that moved whether anyone was ready or not. 3 years ago you had stood in a different place, listening to words about Jerusalem. The village square, cold rain, a priest from somewhere else, his voice carrying over the crowd. He spoke of Jerusalem, of the Holy Sepulchre, of Christian pilgrims abused and turned away, of holy places defiled, of duty to God and to the faith. He spoke of salvation, of how those who took up the cross would have their sins forgiven, how they would be blessed, how their names would be remembered. The words had been clear then, simple. They had made sense in a way that required no questioning. Your father had stood beside you, not speaking, just listening. His face showed nothing. Afterward, you had asked him what he thought. Words are easy, he had said. The road is long. He had been right about that. Now you sat on the wall of the city those words had described, and everything was different. Not because the words had been lies. Not exactly. But because words could never prepare you for the weight of stone under your hands, for the specific quality of light on unfamiliar streets, for the way victory felt less like triumph and more like exhaustion, for the sounds of a city falling, for the knowledge of what was happening below, what would continue to happen, the things that followed every city taken by storm. The priests had rules about it, guidelines, principles of just war and appropriate conduct. But you had been in enough cities to know that rules dissolved when walls fell, that the space between ordered assault and chaos was measured in minutes, that men who had been disciplined soldiers became something else when resistance collapsed. You had seen it at Antioch. You would see it again here. The thought made you tired in ways that sleep could not fix. Jerusalem was real now, not an idea, not a destination, just a place, old, weathered, full of people whose names you would never know, whose stories would end today or tomorrow or whenever this stopped. And you were part of that. Not innocent, not guilty, just present. Just one more man with a sword, making choices that seemed inevitable in the moment and questionable in memory. Robert stood. I need to find water. Yeah. He climbed down into the city, disappeared into streets you could not see from this angle. You stayed. The sun was directly overhead now. Noon, or close to it. The day was half over. The rest of your life stretched ahead. Undefined. Uncertain. You would stay in Jerusalem for a time. Days, weeks, months, however long orders required. And then you would leave. Or you would not. You might go home. Back to Normandy. Back to a village that would have changed in your absence. To a family that had lived 3 years without you. To a place where people who had not been here would ask you to explain what could not be explained. Or you might stay. Join one of the new orders being founded. Templars, Hospitallers, men who made this their life, who chose Crusade as permanent condition. Or you might die here, of fever, of wound, of the simple accumulated weight of everything. All of it felt equally possible, equally meaningless. You closed your eyes and felt the sun on your face. Warm, constant, indifferent to everything below it. Somewhere in the distance, church bells began to ring. Not triumphant, just marking time, the way they always had, the way they always would. You opened your eyes. Jerusalem spread below you, ancient, enduring, continuing despite everything. The crusade was over, but you were still here, still yourself, still trying to understand what it meant that you had crossed the world for this. For stone and dust and the particular quality of light at noon, For the weight of a sword you did not want to carry anymore but could not put down. For the memory of a boy with a knife who you had let run away. For the question you could not answer. Was any of this worth it?
Together.
The bells continued ringing. You stood, slowly, feeling every ache, every year. You sheathed your sword, finally, picked up your helmet, and climbed down into the city to find water, because that was all you could do. Keep living, keep moving, keep carrying the weight until you could not carry it anymore. Jerusalem would remember this day. History would remember this day. But you would remember something different. The heat, the thirst, the face of a boy running away, the distance between what you had believed and what you had become, the price of stones. The parchment was still blank. You sat in a commandeered house, stone walls, a small window that let in afternoon light, a table that had belonged to someone else, a chair that creaked under your weight. The ink was better now. You had found proper ink in a shop. The shop owner was gone. The ink remained. You dipped the quill, watched a drop form at the tip, held it over the parchment. Dear Father, no. To my family, no. Jerusalem has fallen. No. How did you say it? How did you compress 3 years and 1,000 miles and everything you had seen into words that could cross the distance home? How did you tell them you had made it? That you were alive? That the crusade was over and you had survived, and what did you not tell them? The parchment waited. Patient, willing to hold whatever you could finally put into words. You began again. I am writing from Jerusalem. Simple, factual, true. The journey was longer than expected. The city is taken. I am well. The quill moved, words appearing, inadequate but present. I think of home often, of the fields, of the barn, of mother's bread, of small things that seemed ordinary but were everything. I do not know when I will return, or if I will. The future is unclear, but I wanted you to know I am alive, that I remember, that I have not forgotten who I was before I left, even if I am not that person anymore, even if I cannot explain what I have become. You paused. The next part was harder. I have seen things I cannot write about, done things I cannot undo, carried weights I cannot put down, but I am alive. That has to be enough. You signed it, your name. Strange to see it written, as if you were confirming you still existed. The letter would take months to reach them, if it reached them at all, but it was written now. That was something. You folded it carefully, sealed it with wax you had found in the same shop as the ink. Tomorrow you would find someone traveling west, someone who could carry it. For now, you set it on the table and looked at it. A small rectangle of parchment, a bridge across distance, proof that you had been here, that you were still here, that somewhere, despite everything, you still hoped there was a home to return to. Outside, Jerusalem continued, ancient, enduring, indifferent. You stood and walked to the window. The city spread below, changed, changing, already adapting to new rulers, already forgetting the violence that had brought them, already becoming something else, as you were becoming something else. The crusade was over, but the carrying would continue for the rest of your life, however long that was.